I'm going to sit to talk, but I'm going to stand for a minute to assure you that though my talk is going to have perhaps a little more Fort Worth than you might really want tonight, that I do have a profound love and appreciation for Grapevine. And it came when I was working for the Historic Preservation Council for Tarrant County back in the 80s, and they were doing the Tarrant County Historic Resources Survey. They hired me to publish the volumes, and so I would take the list that the surveyors had started with and go drive around to see what happened, making sure that each house or building was still there, what kind of shape it was in, had it been restored, try to find out some more history if the research that had been done was not good. And I had never been up to Grapevine before then, and I fell in love. It was a much simpler place than it is today, but there were great restaurants, there were great little antique shops, there were lots of very friendly people, and I think it's just an absolutely wonderful and charming city. And so I came up here early tonight and took myself to dinner at Will Hoyt's, and which is a whole lot more of a bar now than I had expected that it was when I came before. So I just wanted to reassure you of my love for Grapevine. Okay, so, all right. I think we're good. My talk tonight is about the courthouses that have served Tarrant County prior to the current courthouse. So when we get to the building that is now standing in downtown Fort Worth, we're going to stop, okay? All right. Fort Worth, by all rights, should be Birdville. And that is because the legislation that established Tarrant County specified, and I hope you can see, I'll have to use my finger as a pointer. It says, the place receiving the highest number of votes shall be the place established as the county seat of said county of Tarrant and shall be called Birdville. So it was not the location of the town, it was whichever location was chosen was supposed to be Birdville. And the people in Fort Worth just chafe at this thought. They can't believe that that's true.
So is it legally the name?
Fort Worth sort of became the 800-pound gorilla, and they kind of ignored and ran roughshod over the law, and at this point I don't think anybody's going to make them change it. So, but if you look, this was the legal act that established the county, an act creating the county of Tarrant, and that's what it says in the laws that are on file in Austin. Now, this is a handy little guide that I found in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram that talks about the various buildings that have served as the Tarrant County Courthouse. It's sort of one of my initial go-bys about what's really true and what's not true. And I wanted to see if I could find all of them. Turns out they're mostly right, but they've left a lot of things out, and a couple of things they don't have quite right. So we're going to go through and see what actually happened. This lovely, fine, former log cabin was, to my knowledge, or is to my knowledge, the only photograph of the courthouse that existed in Birdville when Birdville was, which is now Haltom City, was truly the county seat. And the earliest reference that I found to a courthouse in Birdville is from the Clarksville Standard newspaper in 1852. And it's just a legal notice telling somebody that they needed to appear. By this time that this picture was taken, probably in the 1930s or something, it was pretty much in ruins. Probably didn't last too much longer after that. One good storm would have knocked it out. Now, Birdville, as you can see, is literally, if you are driving down into Fort Worth on 121 and you take, it's I think Carson Street going south and north, if you go north into Haltom City proper, the downtown area, you will be roughly where Birdville was. And I've seen two different maps. One has a 9-block area, this one, and another that has a 12-block area. And the central block was the public square. So that's where the courthouse building that you saw would have been. And it is now somewhere in the vicinity of the 600 block, or the 6,000 block, I'm sorry, of Broadway, close to where Birdville High School is. And unfortunately, the only name that still retains Birdville is today the school district, right? The Birdville Independent School District. And why Haltom City? Well, I do know why they decided to change it, because the Haltoms, the family with the jewelry store, had a lot of land out in that area, and they decided to rename it for them, that area. Now, in the mid-1850s, about 1856, Fort Worth, which had ceased to be a military fort in 1853, started getting ideas, thinking that they were closer, larger, bigger and better, and that they should be the county seat. And so there was an election, and Fort Worth won the election by, let's see, 7 votes. And as you all know about contested elections, you end up with recounts, lawsuits, all kind of fun like that. But Birdville did not give up easily. They decided, even though they had lost this first county seat election, they decided that they were going to build a courthouse, not just a log cabin like the one that they had had before, but a real, honest-to-God brick courthouse. And it was not any small building either, if you consider the times. It was going to be 50 feet by 50 feet, and it was going to be 2 stories tall and made of brick. I've not found any architectural plans, so I had a friend who's an architect just do a very quick, rough sketch for me, or what I thought was going to be a very quick, rough sketch. And after about 4 days of asking me questions about this building and what kind of detailing it should have, and me going, I don't know. Well, what kind of roof should it have? This is the picture that I got. My friend Mark Gunderson. He says, should I put people in for scale? I said, yes, absolutely. That's a big help. So you can see that it looks rather substantial. And when we come to look at the picture of the courthouse that was built in Fort Worth a few years after this, I would just want you to keep this building in mind. So Birdville has lost the county seat election. They've already started to make plans. They have these architectural drawings. They are burning the brick. The contractors are actively engaged in making the brick, and they've established a newspaper. This is not a town that is just going to roll over and take it lying down. But they lost. Fort Worth decided that they were going to go ahead and build a courthouse. And if we were going to go into this and talk about all the lawsuits and things that happened, we would be here for the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to skip ahead. We're just going to go kaboom And you all understand and know who won. Fort Worth won, and Birdville lost. Fort Worth decided that it was going to build its first courthouse about 1857. This is not the actual courthouse. It was described by Julia Catherine Garrett as being a log cabin, a 3-room, double pen log cabin. And among the things that she noted were that it was located on the public square, which is where the courthouse is located today, that it was just a 3-room structure with a hall running through the center, and she didn't know if there were doors or not, but that the town's inebriates and stray hogs often slept in the hallway. So it was a high-class joint, of course, compared to what Birdville was planning to build, right? And Fort Worth actually used this building, and you can take your pick, until 1866 or 1869 or somewhere in between. It's hard to pin down the date exactly. In 1860, they decided that they would build a permanent courthouse. And this is when I want you to think back to the picture that I showed you about Birdville's building at 50 by 50. This is clearly a much smaller building, probably on the order of 20 or 25 feet square, 2 stories tall, not anywhere near the scale. And it was made out of stone, not brick. They started it in March of 1860, laid the cornerstone, and construction continued for about a year, and then all the reports stopped. And we all know why. Not much got done in Fort Worth or in Texas or anywhere for that matter. In Fort Worth, many of the able-bodied townspeople left either to, and that's the male able-bodied townspeople, the women were left at home to run things, right? But the men either joined the Confederate Army or they were sort of had their arms twisted to join what was called the Frontier Battalion to go out and fight the Indians, because when they pulled when Texas seceded, that left no federal troops to guard against Indian attack. And so somebody had to go out there and fight the Indians. And so they commandeered whoever hadn't gone and joined the Confederacy to go out and fight. So there was nobody left in town, and there wasn't much money lying around. There wasn't much of anything. They were just barely hanging on, so they certainly weren't building the courthouse. And it took a while after the Civil War to get things going again. One account that I read said that 3-room courthouse was, that wood frame courthouse, the one that I first showed you, the fake picture of, the dog pen, was used until 1866. But this newspaper article, Dallas Weekly Herald, says that the courthouse in Fort Worth was finished in 1869. So maybe they had this building that you can see on the map completed enough. Maybe the first floor was dried in and they could use it. It was used until 1876, so it probably stood unfinished for about as long as it was actually used. It was pretty straightforward, but newspaper accounts do note that there was a long engraved stone over the west door. And if you can look at the map, this bird's eye view map, you can actually see somebody actually has drawn. It tells you what a good artist the person who drew the bird's eye view map was, because he paid attention to the building and probably gave it as much or more prominence than it deserved. Now, this building is finally being used. It's the late 1860s, early 1870s, and there are people who are worried. And they are worried, in fact, about fire, because fire is a big problem. And I don't know, Grapevine probably had a number of fires as a young town. And in March of 1876, they did a study of the county and all the things that should be taken care of. And one of the things they said was that we really need a vault in the courthouse because the records are at risk. It's extremely important that we do this, and we do it right away. Did they? No, because we all know that only 4 days after that notice appeared in the newspaper with the results, the courthouse caught on fire. And the fire started in the area, in the county clerk's office where all the records were kept. So everything, including property records in Grapevine and property records in Birdville and everywhere else in the county, Mansfield, any other little town, went up in flames. This is the sum total of the headline for that time. They were not given to overstatement of bad things at that point in time. I think the typeface is probably about only that high. Quickly, they had to look for other places to meet. And the Oddfellows met, you can see a red circle around one of the buildings. That was the Oddfellows Hall. And they met upstairs. You know, the Oddfellows, like most fraternal organizations, they would have a business on the first floor, and then they would have the rooms for their meetings that would have secret rituals on the second floor. Well, that was a nice big open room, probably one of the larger ones in town. And so they quickly moved there and also into a photography studio and they had court in probably in the Oddfellows Hall, and they ran the offices out of the photography studio. They also authorized a guy who was named W.A. Huffman to build a temporary courthouse, and it was paid for with help by the businesses around the public square. So these public-private partnerships for building county structures, they're nothing new. They also realized that if they didn't put something up quickly, I mean, Birdville could still come back. You never know, you're always looking over your shoulder, and that they would lose business to other parts of town. So they had to get that courthouse that kept everybody coming back in place.
Who are the Oddfellows?
They're kind of like the Masons and the Woodmen of the world, and they're all fraternal orders.
Yeah.
And, you know, back in the 19th and early 20th century, a lot of it was making good business friends. You know, if you were an Oddfellow and you were an Oddfellow, then of course you would recommend each other's businesses to other people. You know, well, so-and-so's an Oddfellow, good person, you know, really should consider patronizing. So it was as much business development, but also you didn't have a lot of entertainment opportunities. It was not like you could sit at home and, you know, haul out your iPhone or even turn on your television for that matter. So they were social venues too, and kind of gave people a sense of being special.
I know they were here because there's a door on Main Street.
Yeah.
It has the Oddfellows.
Yeah. They had that I and the O's interlocked in F. And all of those organizations have really declined in membership today, and I think it's due to the pace of life and the fact that people are juggling so many things in work and social life that they don't have time for it. So when the courthouse burned, the county sold the stone. Now, they were no fools. They sold the stone from the former building. It's like, we got this ruin here. It's kind of still smoking, but you're welcome to come and haul off all the rock. We'll take bids for this. You'll pay us to come and get all this rock. You can't have the cornerstone. You can't have anything that's in the cornerstone. You can't have the carved lintel that was over the western door. Can't have that either. And, you have to haul off everything that burned. All the stuff that's just ash and charred lumber, what have you, at that point. It does not sound like it was the best deal to be had. But the building that did go up, and I was thrilled when I found this picture at the University of Texas at Arlington, because it looks on one hand like the laying of the cornerstone for the new county courthouse, but in fact it shows the temporary courthouse that W.A. Huffman, who later was an agricultural implements dealer, had built. So took up a collection from everybody around the square, and you can see. They're Masonic. Yeah, they are. It's a Masonic lodge, number 148, and they're all wearing Masonic aprons. Yes. And the Masons did what was called leveling a cornerstone, which was kind of almost a ritual blessing of a cornerstone, and leveling and make sure it was straight, but straight in the moral sense as much as the physical sense. But the long building that has its side to you is the temporary courthouse building, the one that W.A. Huffman built. It was occupied by May 11th, 1876. So that's really pretty quick, from March to May. They got it up in, 6 or 7 weeks. And they were only supposed to use it for a year, at which point in time it was supposed to revert to Mr. Huffman, but they had to use it for about 18 months until October of 1887. And once that happened, once they got the new courthouse built, they sold this building and moved it to the north side of the square. Now, the wonderful thing about this picture is that we can date it specifically. The cornerstone for the new courthouse was laid on December 13th, 1876. So we know exactly when this photograph was made, and you can see what a bustling / not bustling place Fort Worth was at the time. And you have to remember that when the courthouse burned, this was before Fort Worth got the railroad. It had not yet come to town. And people, it was over just west of Dallas, just barely, kind of making very slow progress coming across the prairie. And people were uncertain. And so they left Fort Worth in droves. So Fort Worth is still worried. We've just had our courthouse burn. We've got to get that railroad in, or we're in deep trouble. And the railroad finally made it on July 19th, 1876, or July 18th, I can't remember which. And at that point, things really started to turn around. That was when they got a sense that Fort Worth was gonna make it. And they had this temporary courthouse, and they were rushing plans to build a new courthouse. And so it was gonna be bigger and better than anything that they've ever had before. They decided to do it large. They actually looked for an architect, and it didn't really matter that architecture didn't amount to a whole lot back then. It was kind of like a lot of professions that you could do having had a little bit of training for it, but nobody really made you take a test or made you pass any kind of licensing exam. So if you called yourself an architect, you were. So a lot of people who had, an engineering course here or there or something like that would call themselves an architect as well, whether they could design a building or not. They hired a guy named John H. Ryan, who was from Dallas. Although a couple of newspapers claimed him as being from Fort Worth, because you want that local pride of place. It's always good to hire somebody local. But they hired Ryan. But then they decided to pile on even more. They hired a guy named Daniel O'Flaherty, who was another civil engineer from Kansas City, Missouri, and he was hired to be the supervising architect, and that's a person that's supposed to watch over what the contractors are doing and make sure they're doing it all right, so that you don't get that cheap insulation, or you don't get that cheap wood in there. You get what you paid for. And then they hired two contractors, Thomas and Werner. Thomas, who was also from Missouri, from Kansas City, just like Daniel O'Flaherty, and Werner from Dallas. And Thomas and Werner also, even though they were really contractors, they also called themselves architects. So right now we have at least 4 people who fancy themselves as having design skills. And then we add one more person on top of it, a guy named John Chapman, because the Commissioner's Court didn't really trust their supervising architect. They had to have somebody to watch over the contractor and the supervising architect. So we have, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, 4 of whom style themselves as architects involved in this project. I ask you, what could go wrong? And not a lot of these people have strong ties to Fort Worth or the community. As a matter of fact, none of them really do. So things start off pretty well. They're starting to build the new building, and it goes pretty well through the early part of 1877 and then starts to go downhill. In April, the dome is up, the framework for the dome is up. Now, I will remind you that Fort Worth still doesn't have a lot of money yet. The railroad has come and things are beginning to look around, but they don't have a ton of money, and the rest of the county is still not very thrilled with Fort Worth, it being the county seat, and so they're not necessarily that eager to pay taxes to build a new courthouse in Fort Worth, but Fort Worth, of course, wants their money. They go through the first part of 1887, and then, let's see here, by July of 1877, the contractor is given 2 weeks to finish the job. So things apparently have been going very slowly. And one thing that they did, which proved to be a major problem, is, you have this beautiful courthouse dome, and when you see the pictures, you'll know the building. You'll probably have seen it as history lovers. This beautiful kind of rounded dome on the courthouse. A real courthouse would have had some kind of a wooden framework and slate roofing. This one had tin roofing. So they took the cheaper option, the bargain basement courthouse roof, as you were. And signs of the problems start to come in September. The new courthouse leaks already. It's not even finished. Well, one court has moved in. He's so frustrated. One judge is so frustrated that the courthouse is not ready for use that he just announces that he's going to hold court, and he moves everybody in, and then he moves out the next day because the din of the workmen hammering and doing everything, he can't hear to hold court in the courthouse. It's not until September and October of 1877 that the departments even begin to be able to move in, and it's the ones down below on the lower floors. In November of 1877, the contractors finally call it quits. They're pissed with each other. This dissolution down here says, the co-partnership heretofore existing between Thomas and Werner is this day dissolved by mutual consent. So they're like, we are done with each other. We are not having anything to do. So basically they walk away from the job, and they take their other jobs that they're working on and give them, Werner gets one and Thomas gets the other. And they're just like finished with Fort Worth. And in January of 1878, Fort Worth Courthouse still isn't completely finished. But it is a sweet building. Now, how many of you have seen this building, seen pictures of this? Okay, there's a few people here. This really was a very photogenic courthouse, or maybe just that it was the first really nice courthouse that Fort Worth felt like it had put on the face of the earth. It had, the main section was about 50 by 60, so the part that's under the dome, not the wings. So that's about the size that Birdville's proposed brick courthouse would have been. The courts were held in the center section on both the first and second floor. There were 14-foot ceilings on the first floor and 37-foot ceilings on the second floor. And if you look at those really tall arched windows, don't you know the light in that room would have been beautiful? Now, mind you, they wouldn't have had any electricity at that point in time. But it was meant to be a place to impress people if you went to a session in court or something in that new building. And for a number of years, the Star-Telegram thought that this was the building that had burned, when in fact it was the previous building. This one stood, it leaked, but it was not burned down. And the drawing on the left is one of the architect's sketches for the building that sort of shows you the difference between an architect's rendering and then what actually came out. And mind you that everything that you see on that dome is all tin and painted.
Is that still standing somewhere?
No, it's not here. Not with us any longer. You'll see what happens to it. And this is one of my favorite early Fort Worth photographs. It's what's called a stereopticon or stereo view. And if you put it in a special viewer, it's two pictures made from very slightly different vantage points. And you put them in a stereopticon viewer and look at it through sort of, it was like 19th century virtual reality. Like a Viewmaster, yeah, exactly. It looked like it was 3D. So it looked like it was real. And if you imagine back in 1870s, this was something that was unbelievable. On the left-hand side is the old El Paso Hotel, and you've got the sign that's sticking out on the left is a sign advertising daily stagecoach runs, because between 1876 and 1880, the train ended in Fort Worth. So if you wanted to go west of Fort Worth, you had to take a stage. So this is an early picture. It's pre-1880. Fort Worth does have a streetcar. You can see it coming down, headed south on Main Street, coming south from the courthouse, being pulled probably by a mule, more likely than a horse. And you can see that Main Street is not paved. And it looks like it's been a little muddy off and on because there are ruts in that road everywhere. So it was not the most smooth ride unless you were on the streetcar. And the streetcar would run just up and down Main Street to the Texas and Pacific Railroad Depot. That was all it did. It would stop in between, but that was as far as it went. So I love this picture because it shows, if you go downtown today and stop, the El Paso Hotel was at 3rd and Main Street, and look up and see how many buildings and how tall the buildings are between 3rd and the courthouse. It's all skyscraper kind of stuff now. But this was Fort Worth 140 years ago. And this is another picture that shows how busy Fort Worth became. Even though this courthouse had been kind of built on the cheap, the town had a railroad, it was growing, it was here to stay, and people wanted to come to town. They came to trade, they came to sell their cotton and their other merchandise, their other agricultural products, and you can see, even compared to the picture that I showed you with the temporary courthouse, just how much more there is going on in the background. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that the building that looks like they have drawn it out, the low building kind of back and to the left of the courthouse, the long, low building, I believe that is the old temporary courthouse that they moved. Now, how many of you have seen this mural in Fort Worth? Okay. Never happened, for several reasons. One, this building was not standing in 1875. In 1875, the old courthouse had not burned. This building had not yet been built. They might have still had a few cattle drives coming through town, but once you had the railroad come to town, it was a whole lot cheaper and a whole lot less inventory shrinkage. That is, your cattle did not lose as much weight when you put them on a railroad car and took them up to Abilene or Dodge, Kansas, or wherever you were going to sell them, than if you walked them up there. So people could make a lot more money. Stockmen could make a whole lot more money by using the railroads to transport their cattle. So back in the mid-1980s, when they got the artist to paint this trompe l'oeil painting on what turns out to have been the old interurban building in Fort Worth, they did not do their homework and did not get the picture right. And so it just kind of chaps me every time I look at it. And I may be the only person who cares.
It prides itself on its historical society and all those things. I can't imagine they allowed that, or that somebody didn't catch it.
Well, I don't think they knew at the time that they were doing it. And I'll tell you what, that mural saved that building, because it's really the only old building standing on Sundance Square. And so many people came and had their picture taken in front of that mural that they decided that they could not get rid of the mural, AKA they couldn't tear the building down. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. Print the legend. You know, when you have a choice between the truth and the legend, print the legend. So the reviews began to roll in on the new courthouse. Many of them, of course, come from Dallas. And they say lovely things like, it needs a new dome, new wings, a new cupola, new plastering, painting, and carpentry work. It doesn't work and ought to lay up for repairs. The cement flooring doesn't work. They need to lay hardwood floors, basically. It still leaks. And that the tin was put on by men who have no interest at stake. They only wanted their daily wages. So the reviews are not very good. And Fort Worth is growing. They need space. So what do? By 1882, they decide county business. We have a whole lot more county business than we've had before. We'll just put a different roof on this building. We'll make it bigger by going up. You know, they never tell you what the real problem is. And I never knew exactly what had happened, because I'd seen pictures that I'm going to show you in the next couple of slides. And I never knew where this mansard roof had come from. But in fact, it was to stop the leaks in the courthouse roof, because they had built it on the cheap in the first place. I found this lovely 1881 article, the one in the bottom left, that says the old courthouse dome is being taken down. It was lifted 2 or 3 feet out of plumb by a cyclone. Yes, a tornado, and will be replaced by a mansard roof. So they decided to put a positive spin on it and say that it was going to give them more room. That's what they're saying here. We absolutely just got to have more room, and that's the reason that the public gets. But if you read, down in the little bitty articles on page 24 of the newspaper, they're saying, oops, the dome was not heavy enough to sit on top of the building, and it got blown 2 or 3 feet off, and things are really in bad shape. We've got to do something. So now mind you that this building had not really been finished until 1878. The lovely, beautiful building here was not finished and wholly in use until 1878. By 1881, they're already deciding that they've got to do something to it. And so they haul off the old roof, the old tin dome, and they put this mansard roof on. And the 1885 Fort Worth Sanborn map shows you can see where it says French roof. And you can see how the offices are in the little wings of the courthouse. And look kind of carefully at this picture. There's only one little building sticking off the side, like a little shed that's been added. And then there's another one-story building that's kind of up in the upper right from the rest of it. We'll find out what that does in just a second. So they start building, and this is what it looks like. And in some ways, it's just as nice a courthouse. It's a lot more functional. What it does is add yet another story, because they can have another courtroom in that mansard roof area. And this is complete, finished by 1883. So our pretty little courthouse isn't finished till 1878, and by 1881, they're already ripping the roof off, and by 1883, it's already being used with a completely different roof on top of it. But in all of this, have we even thought about fire? I ask you, did the county commissioners think about fire when they were building the new? Well, maybe they didn't. They didn't build a vault. And people start to gripe again. And they say, what if we have another fire? Because today, if you do any kind of research in Tarrant County, you hit a basic brick wall with the courthouse fire of 1876. There were a few records that were refiled after they started accepting them again, but mostly they didn't have them. They're just gone. And one might ask, well, you think they'd hop right to it? Well, they had a small problem. And that is that the county treasurer had committed some fraud. That is, he had taken county money, and they didn't have enough money in the budget to do the work. So they had to just sit on this until 1889. At which time, here's another of the Sanborn maps. What they decide to do is they add, you can see the one wing that goes up to the left. They added a part of the building that is made of stone, that has iron windows, it has bars on the windows, it has iron shutters. It's, if you read it's kind of small, to read it, but it says fireproof all over it in that. They also, in order to make more room, fill in between two of those wings to add more office space. And we finally see what the little yellow box up and to the right, but still on the public square is. Can anybody tell what it says? Can you read it? It says, I'll give you a hint. Put your European thinking hat on. WC. A water closet. That is the public toilet. Yes, that's the outhouse for the county courthouse, which I think is just a hoot that it's shown on a map like this. And the Sanborn fire insurance maps were literally drawn to help rate buildings for fire insurance policies. So. And this is the only picture that I've found, and I couldn't make any sense of it when I first saw it, but after I researched the history of the courthouse buildings, I could see, and I'm gonna get up to take you on a little guided tour. This is the extension with the much smaller windows. You can even see the metal shutters compared to the larger arched windows. So this is the fireproof part of the building. And that's the only picture I've ever seen. Also, this is one of the few pictures that shows the front door of the courthouse. It faced south towards Main Street. Most of the pictures, they're taken looking like from Belknap Street at the back of the courthouse and then looking down at town. So we get to 1889, 1890, and we still have problems. Fort Worth is growing. Tarrant County is growing. We need more room. So finally, they decide that they're just going to take the bull by the horns, and they're going to get rid of this thing that started off after the fire as a quick make-work kind of job built on the cheap. We are going to level this sucker and make it go away. If you look at it, it doesn't look like it's in great shape right now. The fence itself, some of the trees don't look too healthy. It doesn't look like the yards, the grounds are very well kept. Admittedly, it's not a great photograph, but as you kind of start to look around it, you have the feeling like they were just kind of ready to be done with this building. So, got to tear it down. What do you do in the meantime? Well, conveniently for them, and mind you, this is early 1890s, the economy is beginning to slump. You remember the panic of 1893, the bad economic times. But they had a guy named Wallace Hendricks, who was an attorney who had just built this beautiful building at the corner of 7th and Russ Streets. That would be at 7th and Commerce now, and hadn't been able to lease it. So the county took it over as the temporary courthouse, while the courthouse building that is still in use was being built. It was large enough, it served its purpose well, it just wasn't quite as elegant as perhaps a courthouse should be. And after everyone moved into the new courthouse, the building we're still using today, that was constructed between 1893 and 1895, the building was used by the Fort Worth Medical College, and that's what you can see on the building. This picture is from that 1895 to 1903 time period. And it was a fairly short-lived medical school in Fort Worth, and it produced a number of female physicians, interestingly. There were 4 or 5 people in the class over the years that were female physicians, and the Tarrant County Archives has just relocated a photograph that shows Daisy Emery Allen, who was one of these early physicians, conducting an autopsy in an amphitheater. So you talk about a rare photograph. It is incredible that it's turned up. So none of these buildings exist today. This building, the one that was the temporary courthouse, eventually became a hotel. It had another 2 stories added on top, and then it was demolished in 1955 when, urban renewal was starting, and the whole idea was just to pull down everything that was old or in a bad part of town. But we can be very glad that the current Tarrant County Courthouse here under construction still exists today. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Maybe not what you were expecting, but I hope you enjoyed it.